Welcome back. It's been a while since I went through on the analysis board a game that I played against one of you, my subscribers, but that's what I'm going to do here today. Not too long ago on Lichess, I played a game against one of my subscribers named Verigby, I think is how the username is pronounced. Verigby does not have a flag on his or her profile, but I assume from the comments that we exchanged that they're from an English-speaking country or are very fluent in English, no matter where they're from. Now, this was right after I started opening with e4 as opposed to d4, which is what I used to open with, and Verigby played the Caro-Kann defense, which I'm somewhat familiar with from the other side because I played the Caro-Kann so often. So when I saw that's what was going on, I knew what to do, and I knew that the version of the Caro-Kann that bothers me the most is the advanced variation. Stockfish here on Lichess at a depth of 48 actually gives a slight advantage to the exchange variation, but I think that advantage would even out before too long. In fact, it doesn't even recommend advancing, according to the engine. But as I said, that's what bothers me the most when I play the Caro-Kann, so that's what I did here. I haven't faced the Caro-Kann hundreds of times yet from the white side, because I haven't played e4 very long. So I'm just kind of going off of what bugs me from the other side and knowing what the Caro-Kann player wants to attempt here. Now, I do know from playing the Caro-Kann that the two moves recommended most are pushing the c-pawn forward to c5 or getting out the light squared bishop to f5. At least those are the two moves that I played the most. One's recommended slightly higher by engines depending on which site you're on, and the other one is recommended by engines depending on what site you're on. I think Gotham Chess here recommends c5. And that's what Verigby played here. Now, I know what my opponents usually do against me at this point. Very often, they check with the light squared bishop, and I would respond by blocking with the knight or with the light squared bishop since I haven't gotten it all the way over here yet. Another thing that I see here is c3. I see knight to f3. I'm trying to remember what else I've seen at this point. I think in a few cases, I've seen the bishop come out here to e3. So in other words, a lot of third rank activity and a lot of it focused around that pawn right there in the middle. The d4 pawn here is, of course, what black is attacking by pushing that c-pawn forward. I couldn't remember which one of those is best. The engine recommends just taking that pawn, or getting the knight out to f3 or c3. All of those are 0.4, according to Stockfish here on Lichess. But as I've mentioned a few times before, I think the engine is a little bit wishy-washy when it comes to openings, the first 3 or 4 moves of the game. Sometimes even more than that, unless you just hang a piece or something. And as all of you probably know, most of these openings have been studied. Every variation of them has been studied for hundreds of years in some cases. I tried something new here. I think it was more of a whim than anything else. I don't remember if I looked at an opening book at this point. I do know that in daily and correspondence games, you are allowed to look at opening books. I wonder what the opening book says here. It says c3 is the most common move, almost 3 times as common as knight to f3, which is the second most common. And taking the pawn is a little less seen than that, checking here. But yeah, I think all 3 of those are moves that I have seen, or all 4 of those, I should say. What I did was, I think, the 6th most common one, which is to play c4. The engine says that takes us to even, and black has options here of getting the knight out or taking the d-pawn or playing e6. I know e6 is a big thing in the Caro-Kann. Usually it's after the light squared bishop comes out somewhere, but sometimes not, as I've learned. And Verigby did ask me after the game via a private message on Lichess about my c4 move. I think the question was something along the lines of, is that something you normally play, or was it a spur of the moment thing? And I don't remember the exact wording of my answer, but basically, yeah, it was a spur of the moment thing because, again, I haven't played e4 long enough to be really familiar with this or to have a tried and true response to the Caro-Kann defense. They did play one of the better moves, which is to take my d-pawn. And I thought about taking back here with the queen, but I'm not sure exactly why I didn't. I also thought about taking here, but I think if I took with this pawn, their queen would just take back, and then they would have a queen in the middle of the board, and then that pawn would be hanging. I could protect my e-pawn by putting the knight out, but then their queen is protecting this passed pawn. It's basically their front pawn here is a passed pawn at this point, which is why I considered taking it. The engine says that would be okay. I played the move that it looks here like the engine says is the best move, which is knight to f3, which attacks this pawn, protects this pawn, and it's, of course, still allows me to take this with my queen because these 2 pawns are doubled. So I'm not sure. Looks like the engine says e6 is the best move for black here, but again, in the Caro-Kann defense, where most of us who play it have been trained to get that light squared bishop out before playing the e-pawn, if possible. And bishop to g4 is one of the top moves. That's what Verigby played. Now, a lot of times when I've run the analysis after a move like that pins the knight to the queen, the engine has always suggested playing h3 here. And I usually don't. I usually wait a second. Sometimes I get the queen out of the pin first, where it can still protect the knight from the side. Sometimes I get the bishop out, and later in the analysis, the engine always says to play h3. So that's what I played here. But in this analysis, Stockfish says no, that wasn't the option here. The move was to take the d-pawn, which I'm not sure about because they would respond by taking back. And it says I would play knight to c3. That's what it says. Why would I play knight to c3? Oh, because their queen's not defended. They wouldn't take my knight because that pawn would basically be pinned. Okay. Well, the engine is seeing a little further than I normally do, but it says that's the only move that maintains the +5 advantage here is to take that pawn. I could check at this point, which looks like they would bring that bishop back, and then I would put my queen back. That's what the second line says. Queen to a4 check. They would block with the bishop. I would put my queen back, and then they would take this pawn, and that would leave us even. Well, as long as they haven't played e6 yet to keep their bishop from coming back, I'm not going to check with my queen, knowing that they can block with their bishop. I don't know if Rigby would have blocked with their bishop or not. They might have played the knight here. They might have blocked with the queen, hoping for a queen trade, or they might have brought the bishop back. But if they brought the bishop back, I would have had to come back here or, do something. I guess I could have come back here to b3, aiming at that pawn, if they had blocked with the bishop. But I don't know. Anyway, I did play h3 because, as I said, the engine very often has suggested that to me in these analyses, but that gave my opponent a slight advantage. And it is because they can take the knight. I thought that was the whole point of playing this here, is to get them to take the knight so that there's no pin anymore. But I guess, in that case, then there's nothing defending this pawn and nothing attacking that pawn, I guess is the downside there. But Rigby did play there. Of course, it's my best move to take back with the queen, which I did. I wasn't too worried about this front pawn at this point because obviously my bishop guards that square, my queen guards that square, so that front pawn's not going anywhere. What it's doing right now is keeping my knight from coming to its normal developmental square. It's keeping my bishop from going to this square, not that it necessarily would want to, even if that pawn wasn't there. But that pawn is exerting some pressure, and I don't have anything pointed at it right. And now, once that light-squared bishop is traded off, I do know that in almost every instance of the Caro-Kann, once you get the light-squared bishop out, your next move is almost always going to be e6 here. And that is what Rigby played. The idea, of course, is to protect these pawns, give a space for the dark-squared bishop to come out, and then the knight can come out behind it. Sometimes the knight goes over here. Sometimes the knight comes out first and then rotates over to g6. It kind of depends on what else is going on. But I knew that was coming. Now the engine says the only move that's doesn't really give my opponent more advantage is to take this pawn. So that's twice now I should have taken. So this is something I need to learn from the white perspective as I continue to face the Caro-Kann defense from white, is that very often the best move is going to be taking the d-pawn with my c-pawn. That is, after all, why I played c4 in the first place. One of the reasons, the other reasons already mentioned, that I was just trying something new. I probably won't play c4 again, so I probably won't hit this position again, because having seen that the best moves at that point were probably getting the knight out or playing c3, or I think at that point I was putting my d-pawn out there, which I'm not sure how to play that. I'll have to look at that one out. But anyway, I probably won't play c4 again was the point of that. Now, again, after the game, Rigby and I did exchange some messages, and one of the messages was about the next move. I have a copy of the message pulled up over here. They did talk a little bit more about my c4 move back on move 4, but then, they talked about my next move, which is move 8. Bishop to d3 probably gave me a tiny edge. Well, the engine agrees here, as again I said that taking this pawn is the best move recommended by the engine, and the third best move is what I played, which is bishop to d3. You can see the eval bar dropping a little bit there. It's at -1 now, so black definitely has an edge. But there's only a few moves that maintain that edge, according to the engine at this point. The reasoning for my move, I think, is fairly obvious. I'm getting out of the way so I can castle. Also, another reason, of course, is it continues defending my c-pawn. It blockades the 2 d-pawns of the opponent, which are right there in a row. Now they can't go anywhere. The engine says here my opponent should have played queen to c7, which I see attacks this undefended e-pawn, which is directly in front of my king. In that case, it says that I would follow by castling, and I can just about guarantee that I would castle at that point. And then it says that they wouldn't take that pawn. They would probably take this one. I don't know what this opponent would have played. Another couple of moves that would have been fine is knight to d7 or knight to e7. I think in this case, playing with the black pieces, I probably would have played knight to e7 because I know when I've played the Caro-Kann hundreds of times, one of the frustrating things about it is that you're very late in castling. As you can see, we're on move 8 and there's still 2 pieces between that king and the rook. One of the ways to get this knight out, because you can't put it here because of where the e-pawn is to get it out to e7 and then you rotate it over to g6 as I said earlier. And that usually aims at this pawn. And I'm, as I've said, not defending that pawn at the moment. But it is a 2-step process. You're already behind in piece development. Black has no pieces out. So that I kind of expected one of the knights to come like this. If you get this other knight out on the d side, on the queen side, then I expect queen to c7 and castling queen side. I don't know if that's what the plan was here, but Verigby didn't play one of those moves. Checked here. And that was not bad. And of course, at the time, I can't see the engine. I didn't think it was horrible. I do know that I can't block in my normal square because of the pawn. Normally, that's where you block this check in almost every position. And of course, in my d4 years, when I played the d4 and c4 pawns, that was one of the reasons I stopped playing d4, was this bishop always coming over here. And I would block with this knight, and then I never knew if it was good for me, if they would, trade for the knight. Sometimes it was good for me, sometimes it wasn't. But this is that exact situation. And of course, again, at this point, I cannot block there like I normally would. It looks like I have to block here on d2. The engine says blocking with the bishop is best, so that's what I did. Now, the next move, Verigby also mentioned in the private message. Right here, Stockfish says knight to c6 would be good, which defends this bishop. And I suppose it aims at this pawn as well. Or just trading off the dark squared bishops here, which is what usually happens with almost every opponent that I play. If you block the bishop's check with the bishop, they almost always take right then, unless it's already defended by, say, a pawn or a knight that's already defending the bishop in that position. When the bishop's just out there, very often they'll just take, which forces me to have to retake, and then they make their next move. Now, in this case, retaking would probably help me, but I don't know. Stockfish says it's one of their better moves, but I was just thinking that it would help my knight develop to a normal square anyway, since I can't put it on that one, as I already mentioned. And then it would be able to come out this way and, I don't know, maybe come around later or aim at this front pawn. Yeah, that's what it would be. When I took back, I could go there, and then I would be aiming at that pawn, maybe. But Verigby said that this move, they regretted immediately. They used the word rash. I immediately regretted my rash 9 queen to a5, which I knew would return the advantage to white. According to the engine, it did give me some advantage, but of course I didn't know that at the time, and I'm still trying to figure out why. The engine says my only move that gives me the advantage is to take this pawn. Now, I'm trying to figure out why. How does that give me the advantage? I think one of the reasons for their move must have been to offer some defense of the bishop and maybe try to power through here, but maybe as soon as they moved it, they realized that once they took with the bishop, I would take with the knight, and then of course they're not going to take with the queen, because even if my king had to move, it would be worth it to get their queen. So I can see why that would be considered rash. It's not going anywhere else at this point. It's not protecting that pawn from me taking it, because my queen is also pointed at that pawn. Well, fortunately, I did see that. I didn't know if it was my best move, but I knew I could take it. Of course, I don't know if they're supposed to take back. The engine says yes. Okay, so I did take. Yeah, and here the engine is supposed to take back. That last move, by the way, if you can't see the move list here, the queen to a5, Stockfish Game Review here on Lichess counted that as an inaccuracy, and it counted their next move as an inaccuracy as well. I'm interested in why it counted it as inaccurate, however, because the recommendations at the top show that taking back here is the only move that's not a blunder, or mistake at least, because it goes from 0.9 in my favor to 2.4 if they do anything else, or 2.6 if they play what they played, which was to take here. Now, I don't know what the word for these types of positions are, but where there's like an only move for each player. They had an only move in that last position and they missed it. Now I have an only move, and of course it's taking back with the knight. The only other options would be to move out of check, which would ruin my right to castle, so obviously I took with the knight, and I'm up plus 2.5. Now, Verigby said that the next few moves they were worried about queen capturing on b7. I'll set their mind at ease right now. I wasn't looking at that at all. And that's probably a default on my part. I probably should have been looking at it. Of course, if they didn't take here with this pawn and I was able to get my pawn out of the way at any point, that pawn's just hanging, and then of course the rook would be hanging right afterward, unless they were able to check quickly. Of course, they would have seen that since they've moved their queen out here, their queen is hitting that spot. It is their turn because of this, so they can take here and that pawn will be protected by their queen. My opponent actually had several moves that would have been okay for them at this point, maintaining the plus 2 something advantage for me. They did take the pawn, which was the best one, I noticed each one of those, the engine dropped to 1.5 or so and then kind of eased back up into the +2s. Here it's gone up to about +2.5 again. And my best move is b4, the only move that maintains the +2. I guess I can see that it would be attempting to divert their queen away from defending this pawn, because the pawn's not defended, they could just take it. But what else would it be doing? b4. It says that they would take the queen all the way back at that point. I don't know if they would or not. Oh, I guess they would, because that would allow it to keep defending the d-pawn, the rear d-pawn, and then I would castle. Well, I was hoping to castle soon. Obviously, that was the reason for getting these pieces out that I got out, but I didn't see b4, and I'm still not sure about it. But wait, one of you, not too long ago, either commented or left me a message saying that you wished I would learn the Evans Gambit, I think was the name of the, and I did look at it, and I remember that b4 was a move in the Evans Gambit, was it not? Not in this position, obviously. The Evans Gambit is something completely unrelated to this, but I remember that I think it was at a point where the dark squared bishop, the opponent's dark squared bishop was here, and I would play b4 unprotected, attempting to divert them there, I think was the idea. I could be wrong. I haven't given it a shot yet, but I did look into it, in case whoever suggested it is watching this video. But anyway, that's the only thing I can think of, is it's an attempt to divert the queen from guarding that pawn. I'm going to go ahead and do it just out of curiosity. What if they took the pawn? It says they shouldn't. They should go all the way back. Now, if they went back to c7, I would take this pawn. If they went back to b6, I would take this pawn, the d-pawn. But if they went all the way back, I would castle. Okay, what if they took? Then I would play rook to b1. Wait, why I wouldn't take this? Rook to b1's my only good move here. Well, that's why I wouldn't play something like that. See, the engine sees so many moves down the line. So when it says, oh, this really odd-looking move is your best move, that's because it sees something that I'm not going to see when I'm playing it out in a game. Even if I had accidentally played that, and they took here, which gives me a +3 advantage, I probably wouldn't know that rook to b1 was my next move, the only move that maintains any advantage whatsoever. Now, queen to e7 is their only move that's not a blunder here. So if I did find this, my opponent would have kind of an only move. What if they just got out of the way like this? It says +6, where they're protecting both of these pawns. They're out of danger. I guess I could immediately attack them here, but that's not my move. My move is castling. And then it says after I castle, they should still go to e7. Okay, well, I'm not going to go too far down that rabbit hole. But yeah, that's my best move by far. And rook to d1 is my next best move. Queen to g4 is another move that maintains a very slight advantage for me. What does queen to d4 do? Oh, it aims down there. Okay, well, I get that. Who can explain my next move? Why would I have played queen to f4, which left me with a little bit of advantage, but not much? I think it's obvious. I was aiming for this pawn. Their queen was defending that one, so I couldn't take it. So what if I moved up here and aimed at that one? That's pretty simple, right? And they can't defend it other than by putting their queen over here, which would defend both of them from that spot, I guess. Well, they could play knight to c6. That would defend the front pawn, wouldn't it? That's their second best move. First best is knight to e7, and let me have it, but it says I wouldn't. You see the move list there at the upper right. No matter what they play, basically, I'm going to castle on the next turn. Okay, well, that is what happened. They played one of those moves, knight to c6, which defends that front d-pawn, and castling is my best move. Good thing that I played it. And now I think, looking at it from black's perspective, again, which I have played the Caro-Kann a lot, not in this exact position, but I think I would be very likely to get this knight out here and try to castle. The engine does say that's their best move, and that is what Verigby played. I'm supposed to put the knight over here, aiming at that pawn, I guess, because I already have one attacker on the front d-pawn. It looks to me like putting it over here would do the same thing, but also attack the queen. But I guess doing that would, I don't know what doing that would do, but it's not listed among my top 3 moves. I played my second best move, much to my credit, and I am starting to learn that in these e4 positions, putting a rook on e1 is often very good, especially if their king is still in the middle. I have this advanced pawn, which is being attacked once. It might be attacked again here in just a second. And if they ever get that knight over to g6, like I was talking about earlier, now it's going to be attacking my queen and that pawn's going to be toast. So I moved the rook over. And that's not bad. Now, one thing I definitely do not understand is Stockfish's recommendation of knight to d8 here. That's a machine move, I'm pretty sure. You're playing a game like this and they don't castle here and they just play knight to d8, they might be looking at an inch in, especially since I think one of the reasons they picked c6 in the first place was to guard the front c-pawn. My opponent did castle, which is the second best move and the move that I expected from them at that point after having gotten that knight out. Now here I did play knight to f3. I'm not sure why I decided against going over there, but it does add, as I said earlier, a second attacker to the front d-pawn. Now my opponent played the move that I expected on this next move. And now I can tell you, I do remember now. I just said I'm not sure why I went to f3 instead of to b3, but I remember now. It was because I don't like my queen being out here in the front with, pieces able to start heading toward it. I was giving myself an out here to be able to bring the queen back. That knight was in the way, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to pick off this pawn or not, so I was giving myself an escape route. Almost anytime you see me play live, if I have my queen out there, you'll hear me say something like, wait, do I have an escape route for my queen? Now here I did have a route this way, but what's the queen going to do on h2? I'm surprised that the engine says that they should play knight to pawn to h6 here, or now, okay, I guess f6 I get. Yeah, I guess I get f6 at this point, but I'm not sure about h6. What are they going to play g5 and just throw king pawns forward? No, what I expected from my opponent is what they played. I'm just surprised that Stockfish doesn't suggest it, and that's knight to g6. I expected it because, again, this pawn's here, and the queen is here, and they already have a knight pointed at this pawn, so they can take it as soon as my queen moves, because I'm going to move my queen now. And I didn't mention the game review before this, but I will say that I only had one blunder in this game. No mistakes, just one blunder, and it was on my next turn. Now, I had mentioned moving the knight out of the way so that my queen would have an escape route, obviously not to e3 because of the pawn, but to one of these two squares. If I made it down here, I could trade off the queens. My opponent is up a pawn, so it may not be the best idea to start trading off pieces at this point, but I didn't know this opponent. I still don't know them other than the exchange that we had here. And a lot of opponents at my level are very hesitant to exchange queens. So I offered a queen trade. Stockfish says that's a blunder and they should definitely trade it. Now Varigby did mention this one in the messages as well. Says at 16, queen to d2, which is what I just played. I was happy to remove the queens and felt comfortable, though with no clue how to proceed. I also felt comfortable here. I thought I was doing okay. I thought the doubled pawns gave me a little bit of a boost, and the fact that I'm blockading them. They're isolated double pawns. They can't. There's not even any pawns on the files next to them that can help them out. I don't yet have a passed pawn, but I am protecting that pawn, and it's a little forward. And I thought if they tried to attack it with their f pawn, I can just launch that puppy forward, and I've got a advanced passed pawn. Now they technically have two passed pawns on the d file, but probably not going to go anywhere for a little while. So I didn't realize that this move took away so much of my advantage. From plus 1.8 to minus 1.8. That's a 3.6 point swing, which is a lot. It would definitely be to their advantage to take, or to take this pawn, interestingly enough. Because my knight's not guarding the pawn anymore. I just saw that. Okay, nice. I mean, because it's guarding the queen, right? It's the only thing guarding my queen. If they take there and I take back, well, that's a free queen. Okay. So only my rook is defending that pawn at the moment. But if I took with the rook, and they took here, then nothing's defending their queen. It says if they took that, that's their second best move. My best move would actually be to check them. Okay, I'm not going to follow that line out. That's not what happened. I already read the message. My opponent was happy to trade queens here, as was I. And it is their best move to take that pawn. Of course, my knight's not guarding it anymore at all because I moved it to protect to take back on the queens. I'm not going to take back with the rook now. So now my opponent's up 2 pawns. The problem, at least for me, and I assume a lot of other people at my level, is once the queens get traded, there's a different way of thinking about attacking plans. Attacking plans aren't as easy anymore because the queen is such a versatile piece. It can swing so many different ways and geometric shapes around the board with all the diagonals and all the ranks in the files. None of the other pieces have that flexibility, so it's a little harder. Also, I'm a little bit limited where, this knight can't go there, right? Because of this pawn. I'm blockading these 2 pawns a little bit, but I don't know. They're aiming at my bishop. I probably need to do something about that, right? Bishop to b5 was my best move. The problem is if I take here, which I might not because they might move it. If I take here, then these pawns aren't isolated anymore, right? If I take there and I assume they would take back with the pawn, that they've got a pawn defending these 2 centered passed pawns. That's going to get interesting, and they could probably advance that one a little bit and get here with it. And then look at that. Then they'll have 2 connected passed pawns. Their best move is to immediately get my bishop to do something, and that's what my opponent played, a6. My best move's to take. Nope. Yes. No, yes. According to Stockfish. And I had no idea what to do, so I took. They took with the knight. That couldn't have been their best move. It was. I'm surprised by that. I could have sworn that would have been their best move. Well, that shows you how much I know, and it shows you why I have such a low rating. It says it would be a huge blunder if they took with that pawn. Oh, because the knight's undefended. Oh, wow. The knight's undefended. Okay. They took with the knight, which was their best move. But they still have 2 passed pawns. What am I going to do about them? I found one of my better moves. Moving that knight forward that pawn forward keeps their knight from coming in here to b4. But my opponent has an advantage, and I kept it for most of the rest of the game. Now, my opponent's last note in the message that they left to me was that after this move, they weren't sure where the game was going to go. I was feeling the same way. Even though my opponent's up 2 pawns, it's these 2 pawns. I can probably keep blockading them, especially if we trade off rooks. My king doesn't have too many moves to get there, right? I mean, not drawing great arrows today, but 3 moves gets in front of that pawn with my king, and I can probably stop them. All the other pawns face off. If I take their rook now, they take back, and then I'm going to bring my king over maybe, and then put my other rook here, and then we're going to trade off the other 2 rooks. When I saw that, that's why my next move was moving my king over. It is not recommended. Interestingly, Stockfish says get that out of the way. I think maybe that's because it's lining up with these 2 pawns. I think if I avoid the rook trade, get my rook out of the way of that trade, then I'll be able to move my knight in a second, and my rook will be hitting those front 2 pawns, and my knight would be hitting that one too, and overpower their knight that's guarding it. I assume they would want to push it at that point. I don't know. But I brought my king over to protect the rook in the event of the trades. I would end up being okay. That was counted as an inaccuracy. Looks like it was my final inaccuracy of the game. My opponent is up -3 at this point and should definitely take it, but instead they just moved forward 1. Obviously, I think they thought it's protected by the knight. I'm going to put the rook behind it and then have a massive battle here. Well, I saw that they wanted to put the rook behind it. I did not want them to put the rook behind it, so I took it, forcing them to take with the knight. And now it's going to take them a second to line up another one here. And I said what I was talking, I did what I said I would. Wow. I did what I mentioned earlier, which is trying to get the king over there in front of those 2 pawns. I brought my king. They can't check me immediately. Pretty soon I'm going to be able to get in front of these pawns. Again, that's their only advantage there. Their best move was to start bringing their king at this point, but instead they brought the rook as they had planned. I'm grateful that Stockfish says that this was my best move. They can't protect this pawn, can they? Yeah, they need to put this knight over here. No, Stockfish says they need to bring their king, but instead they put their knight over here to protect that front pawn. Well, I can put another attacker on that pawn. It's not my best move. b4. That's twice. Twice in this game, b4 is my best move. You know what? Now that I've done this, the next time I play a bullet game or something, I'm going to play b4 in the middle of the game for no reason whatsoever, except that the computer set kept saying b4 here, and it's going to be a huge blunder and give up something massive in that game. But in this game, I should have played it. But I did not. Instead, I did what I said, which was put another attacker on that pawn. And they're supposed to bring their king or play f6, and they played f6. Guess that's keeping my knight from getting closer there, but I wasn't going there. I was going here. That's what I did. It wasn't that bad. Of course, they take back, and I take back. Now they can guard this pawn, but they're going to have to do it carefully. But they didn't. They moved that rook over there. I'm pretty sure that's obviously coming in here to aim at these pawns that are all still on the 2nd rank. Stockfish says I should go ahead and take the other pawns. But I didn't want them to bring their rook in here. I assumed that was their plan. Then my opponent started bringing the king. Suggested moves are jumping all over the place. Stockfish isn't sure what we should play here, but it's definitely a pawn move. I played a pawn move. Wasn't that bad. My opponent played a pawn move. I'm also supposed to... Oh, maybe I should bring my rook over. Oh, it's having trouble deciding, but it thinks maybe I should put my rook on e1. I did not. I played a pawn move, which is what all the other suggestions were. My opponent moved the rook up. I cannot explain that move. What was that trying to do? I'm not sure. Again, I'm supposed to make a pawn move, but this time I brought the rook over, which, as you saw, was one of my moves from the last turn. And my opponent made another rook move. Oh, that's what the first rook move was for. But they wanted the rook on this file, but protected by the king. I'm looking at Stockfish's suggestions. It keeps changing its mind, but it thinks maybe rook to b1, maybe rook to g1, maybe rook to f1. All of those are okay. Did I play one of those? I didn't, but I played rook to something one, which is over there, c1. It says it wasn't horrible. They're supposed to go over there. It's protected by the pawn. If we trade rooks here, my opponent probably has an advantage because they might be able to protect that pawn. I don't know. That's what I figured. I didn't want to trade rooks, so I put my rook back over there. Well, my opponent realized at this point I'm trying to repeat, so they did that, offered me a draw. I played my best move here and then offered them a draw. My opponent still has a very slight advantage. And again, I think it may be because of this pawn. Our pawns are symmetrical. I'm surprised that it says their best move's a pawn move here, because I was going to then come in here and take that pawn. Wow, but it says that they would block with the rook at that point. Yeah, if I checked, they would block with the rook, and then I would probably just come back. But I definitely wasn't sure whether I could get away with that, so I definitely took the offered draw, which we were about to do via repetition anyway. So thank you, Verigby, for the game. Hopefully I will edit this video down to under 30 minutes. It's over 40 minutes on my end right now, but I think I learned a couple of things. A couple of things threw me off and I'm not sure about, but again, I'm still getting used to looking at the board from the e4 perspective. I'm still getting used to playing against the Caro-Kann instead of playing the Caro-Kann against e4. Still trying to develop my own particular strategies against it. I see it maybe a quarter of the time, maybe a fifth. I'm not sure. I haven't done the math yet, looked at all the games, but I am facing it occasionally. So I need to have a plan against the Caro-Kann. And it definitely wasn't c4, what I played in this game. But anyway, if you are a subscriber and you would like to play me in a game, the easiest way is to challenge me to an unrated daily game like this. I make several moves a day in every daily game, as long as my opponent's making moves back. It does require that you come back every day or so, depending on what time control you set. If you set it to 3 days or 5 days, then of course you have 3 or 5 days to make your next move. But if you set it to 1 day, then you got to move every day or you're going to lose on time. But if you're playing chess every day anyway, it should be something you should be okay with. I'm happy to play you, but again, make sure it's unrated. Some of you are beginners and I would just win and maybe neither one of us would learn anything. And some of you are experts, or very close to it, at least look like experts from my perspective, and you'll just crush me and I won't learn anything from it. So there's no point in playing rated games between us. That's my point. So if you want to, and if it's interesting enough, I'll put it in a video here. Thank you, Verigby, for providing the notes and the messages so that I could have some things to look at from the other player's perspective. I will add that one of the things that my opponent said was that one of their weaknesses, and I think it's one of mine too, is playing solo, which they refer to, that's how they described playing only from your side of the board, only looking at your own plans, your own possibilities, and not thinking about what the opponent is doing. I think maybe because my early chess development was always over the board, because no one had invented the internet yet, or if they had, they hadn't told the rest of us about it, so we always played over the board. So I always had a real person across from me, and I can see their facial expressions. I can see when they put their head in their hands. I can see when they start doing one of those nervous tick things, adjusting their glasses, scratching their nose, whatever it is. You can hear the way that their breathing changes and so on and so forth. You can see their hand motions as they go to move pieces, whether they're upset or calm or confident, those kind of things. Maybe for that reason, I tend to think a little bit more about the person on the other side of the board and wonder why did they play that? But not always. I think we all fall into the trap of not truly grasping what our opponent's idea was for their last move. So that's something Verigby says they're going to work on. I'm going to work on it too. Thanks for the game. And to the rest of you, thank you for spending your time here. I'll see you next time.